What's up YouTube? My name is Julian. I am a professional session musician. I often react to openings and soundtracks from anime and video games. But there is also an underappreciated art, which is sound design. We see it in TV shows, movies, anime, video games.
Thought you were full of it when you said you wasted kindness on me.
And today, I actually got to interview a sound designer who has worked on projects such as Genshin Impact, Callisto Protocol, even a little bit on The Last of Us Part 1. We talked about his job, anime soundtracks, anime shows. Feel absolutely free to comment, like, and subscribe. It helps me a lot to figure out YouTube's algorithm. Good morning and welcome, Roman. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of your time joining us in this humble channel. We are so happy to have you here. How are you and how is the weather back in California?
That's good. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, California is actually kind of rainy the last 2 weeks, which is very
Really?
Uncommon here. It's usually just very sunny and hot like all year round. But it's actually been downpouring a lot the last 2 weeks, but it's pretty sunny today.
Okay, that's definitely weird. I was there once and as you said, it's really sunny, so okay, a little bit of rain once a year is good for your health. So you told me that you were actually an anime lover and soundtracks fan.
Yeah, so I've been listening to anime soundtracks for such a long time.
Really?
I remember back when I was in middle school or maybe in high school too, where I couldn't, one of the issues I had was like I could never find these CDs out in the wild anywhere. They weren't on iTunes.
Right.
They were never available. So I remember I would go to all these shady websites and download. And like my favorites were like from Fairy Tail, from Naruto, from Bleach.
Oh man.
And I would listen to these soundtracks pretty religiously. And nowadays, those soundtracks are on Spotify and they're very wildly available. But
Yeah,
I remember,
so easy to get.
Yeah. I just remember trying, like, going on these websites and just downloading any soundtrack that I could because I enjoyed listening to them so much. And a lot of anime I found through just listening to the soundtrack first before actually watching the show.
Oh really? That's why.
Yeah.
Because I was a kind of an anime fan myself, but I stopped for a moment in my life and I became a musician and stuff, and it was until I made this channel that I started to pay some more attention to that, you know? So it's crazy that your case is the opposite. And what are your favorite anime of all time?
Favorite anime of all time? Ooh, that's really tough. So my
Well,
favorite
like your top 5 at least, I don't know.
top 5, sure. I think my all-time favorite is Another. It's a horror anime, and
I haven't watched it.
yeah, it's kind of this slow-paced ghost story that has some pretty gory stuff that happens in it. But what I love about it is I really love stories that have sort of slow burn pacing where it really builds up over the course of multiple episodes. And going back to sound design, like the anime has really great sound design and Foley, which I think is super impactful. Course. Yeah, because it's a show that's scary, but there's a lot of quiet moments where I think Foley and sound design plays a really
now I get it,
role.
sure.
Yeah. So Another is definitely one of my favorites. I would say there's one anime called Recreators, if you've ever heard of it.
I have, but I haven't watched it though.
So the soundtrack is by Hiroyuki Sawano. So first of all,
of course, man.
It's a banger soundtrack. But it's about like in Japan, like anime characters, not like ones that we would know, but anime characters in that world start coming to life.
Okay.
And like fighting each other. It's kind of nuts, but
it's crazy.
It's a cool story and it has a really good soundtrack. Angel Beats, another great soundtrack.
Sure.
Angel Beats. I think Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Full Metal Alchemist is sort of like one of my favorite anime stories. I like the manga more, but the story and music are so great in that one.
It's a classic,
And
one of the goats, definitely. Well, that's why my nephew told me, because he knows everything about anime.
for sure. And number 5, I feel like there's a lot to choose from. Okay, Darker Than Black.
Wow.
Have you ever seen that one? It's a very noir kind of superhero type anime that came out like at least 10 or 15 years ago.
I think I have heard about it.
Yeah, the soundtrack is by, I think, Yoko Kanno, I think, that did the soundtrack, and it's very it's very jazzy. It's a very noir, jazzy type soundtrack, which makes it really cool.
Oh, that's amazing, man. I'm really much of a it's hilarious, much of a metal and a jazz fan. Both of them are my favorites.
I have some music recommendations for you then.
Oh my god, for sure, man. Let's get into this actually. First of all, there are many anime video game soundtrack lovers in this channel, but for the ones that actually don't know, what is a sound designer? Why is he or she so important in overall entertainment, industry, or media? What does a sound designer do?
Yeah, so sound designers are basically designing everything that you're going to hear in an anime or game that's not music related. And sometimes music does play a key role in this, but the majority of it is basically sound effects, all of the mixing of all the different music effects and dialogue that goes into a project. It's sometimes adding, changing voiceover and editing voiceover, re-recording voiceover. It's recording sound effects in a studio using props, which is Foley, which we can talk about more. It's sort of, sound design is sort of a very wide term that encompasses basically everything that you're hearing when you're playing these games. There's different kinds of sound designers. So there are sound designers in games, for example, that are creating the effects and they're more creative. There are sound designers who are doing more programming type things or connecting audio to the game. So the work that I did, we can get into this later on, the Callisto Protocol. So I was doing more technical work where I was not designing sounds, but I was implementing them into the game and connecting them to objects in the game.
So you know a little bit of programming?
I don't know as much programming. That's something I'm working on right now. But the work that I was doing was more technical in the program Wise, which is game audio middleware, connects to the game engine. So the work I was doing there was, I wasn't creating the sounds in the studio or anything, but I was actually making sure that they worked in the game, that when you play the game, you're able to hear them.
Of course, that's amazing, man. That's really amazing. Yeah. I'm jealous, actually. And do you think that actually some sound designers can help in the creation of timbres or tones for you said that it doesn't include music, but for music, do you think that maybe some sound designers do that, or only the producers of stuff?
I think there are projects definitely where sound designers and composers are working hand in hand, or I think a lot of sound designers also have music backgrounds to begin with. So there's usually a lot of there's some projects that have a lot of crossplay with this. For example, like movies like It Follows, where the score and sound design kind of blend together. They're
sure.
I think, and sound designers are also figuring out with composers how music is going to play a role in the project, how it's going to be balanced out. Music in games, for example, is very interesting because it can change and evolve and disappear based on how you're interacting with the environment around you. So there's a lot of, I think while there are projects where composers and sound designers might be totally separate, I think there are great projects and examples of this where composers and sound designers are always talking with each other and trying to balance each other out.
And that's the beauty about it, that interdisciplinary work. Oh, I love it, man. I once was in a musical, actually, but it was about the LGBTIQ plus community. So they made me do some weird stuff, but maybe I talk about that in another video, Yeah, something I really wanted to ask you is, how did you find out you wanted to be a sound designer? Because sometimes in life we have some goals or dreams, expectations already established, but for other people, they find along the way new passions or new ways of gaining profits, new sources of income out of necessity. How was it for you?
Yeah, so I think I kind of fell into sound design, but it was also something that I had a background in. So I went to film school, and when I got to film school in 2014, I was really interested in being a director. And the thing is, when you go to film school, everyone wants to be either a director, a writer, or a cinematographer. No one wants to do sound design. No one wants to do production audio. It's no one's goal when they first start out to go, I want to be a sound designer, if they're in film school, for example. So I remember one of the first classes that I took at NYU was about, it was called, blanking on the name of the class, but it was basically about creating stories just with audio. So the majority of the projects we worked on in that class were creating audio dramas and doing sound design. And I remember my final project for that class was the English dub had not come out yet. I redubbed a scene in Tokyo Ghoul, and I dubbed it into English and like wrote a new script for it, and I also did all the sound design for it and music mixing.
Oh my crap!
And I think from there, a bunch of like kind of things happened along the way where I worked a lot on set as a production sound mixer, recording the sound and holding the boom mic. And I was in necessity because there were just no people that did sound at NYU. And then from there, I wanted to do a little more creative work. So that's when I started taking more sound design classes. I worked on different student projects. And basically at that point, I did have some interest in still writing and directing. I had this skill set that was it was marketable, and B, it seemed in high demand.
Okay.
And from there, I found an internship in Los Angeles for a post-production house. So I basically moved to LA right after college, and that's how I kind of got started more professionally in sound design, where I was freelancing and then I was working sort of part-time at this one studio. There's a bit more of how I got interested in game audio. So, which is more based in the pandemic. Basically, the short version of that story is when the pandemic hit, it was very hard to find a career in film sound design. In LA, it's very there's less jobs for it, and it's also, I feel like, harder to get into those types of workspaces. But for game audio, if you have a film background and you know at least some whys, or you understand how to use an audio editing software like Pro Tools, or that's a really marketable skill to have. And there's so many different game studios around the world, and I was interviewing a lot more during the pandemic for game jobs than I was for film jobs.
Of course.
So I interviewed at like Blizzard, Naughty Dog, Riot, like a bunch of different places. But
right of the hook.
Yeah. I like right before I got the job I had now, I was like in talks for a job at Blizzard that fell through in the end. But luckily I got reached out to by Formosa Group, and then that's where I've been the last year now, and I've gotten to work on a ton of different types of projects, some more as an assistant and some more as doing more technical design with the Callisto Protocol. But it was definitely a big pivot from where I thought I was going, because I think when I came out of school, I was a little not sure what to do with my career, and I said, I'll do sound design.
You're not alone, brother.
Yeah, it's what I study the most, and it's what I think I'm good at least. But then, I was glad that I was able to make that pivot into games, because the necessity is there. And now that I've been in the industry for a year, I enjoy this work so much more than working on film. And I think there's such a greater future in games than there is for film.
I think the same. And actually, the pandemic affected us all, dude. I even quitted music for a while, like year and a half. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense at all. But thanks to that, we are today here, man. The positive side. Yeah.
And if it wasn't for the pandemic, I wouldn't have spent so much time playing games and
Sure.
being like, oh, this is cool. Like I was not a gamer before the pandemic. And
Okay.
now that's what I do a lot of.
I love that because I'm actually quite a gamer, but yeah, pandemic, wow, boosted that a lot. Let me see. We already talked a little bit about your background, right? Oh yeah, I want to know about your influences. For example, which movies, TV shows, anime, video games are inspirations or influences to you?
For sure. So there's a couple different things I can talk about here. So one of my first influences probably Walter Murch. So Walter Murch, if you don't know, is sort of the father of film sound design. He worked very closely with Francis Ford Coppola. He was basically part of this group at USC back in, I think, around like the 60s with like George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola. They founded this production company together called American Zoetrope, and Murch basically did the sound and all the mixing for some of their early films. So Murch worked on George Lucas's THX 1138. He worked on Francis Ford Coppola's, one of my favorite films for sound design is The Conversation. And sort of got, and not that he was the first sound designer for film by any means, but he's definitely someone who basically made or contributed a lot to how we understand sound as an art form now, or how we understand mixing and things like that. And I've gone to meet Murch on a few occasions, and he's an incredibly smart guy, and so influential to the career I'm in now. So definitely Murch is an inspiration who understands editing and sound so well. And The Conversation is a great example of a film that he's worked on.
Man, I mean, he worked with George Lucas, another father, but of film scoring, maybe. That's crazy, man.
Yeah, he was like a student with George Lucas, and they were friends. And, I don't think Murch worked on Star Wars at all, but they still have like a close relationship, and they definitely work professionally together.
That's crazy, man.
And when it comes, and I definitely have a lot of influence from anime as well. I mean, we've talked about some of my favorites already, but I think what was interesting for me growing up is and I don't want to make myself sound special or anything, but like when growing up, I never really listened to a lot of. I never felt that like my music taste matched anyone else before I gone to the internet, and I found people like me.
Did you feel like an outcast musically speaking?
I definitely felt like I could not share my iTunes library with anyone because I would get judged for it. And it was sad because I felt, because I was listening to like a bunch of anime openings and soundtracks and some video game stuff, and I just didn't really like listening to things that had lyrics in it. I listened to classical music too. And, I did find like some love for different rock bands and stuff in high school, but I definitely felt a little bit of an outcast that I was listening to like, I don't know, the Fairy Tale soundtrack or like any Sawano soundtrack on my phone in high school or something.
And people asked you about your favorite music, and you are like, no, nothing.
I remember someone asked me like what my Spotify number one song of my Wrapped was this past year, and I'm like, listen, it's like an instrumental version of a video game song. I don't know how many times I've listened to it, but it's not anything you've ever heard of. And I'm not trying to say that to sound cool, like it or anything. It's just something from this one artist that I really like that no one else listens to for the most part.
That's how it is. I mean.
Yeah, and I love that anime and soundtracks have influenced me, and I think a big influence for me in the pandemic was I really loved playing through, and I still play through these games, the Legend of Heroes Trails series. Like Trails of Cold Steel is the big, most popular games in that series. But what was really interesting for me is that I can pause for a second because I live right next. So it's so funny that I do audio and I listen and stuff, and I live right next to a fire station.
Oh, I'm not gonna edit this, man.
It
would add taste,
Yeah, it's funny because I hear it like at least once a day. But my you can't see it, but my balcony faces a fire station.
Okay. Actually, cool.
Yeah, definitely a little annoyed when I'm trying to record. It's always when I record things too. It's when it happens.
Oh, of course, always.
So the Trail series, what I love, so it's a very long JRPG series with each game being about like 100 hours or something. But what I loved so much about it when I was playing those games during the pandemic was the English dub was fantastic, and I loved like all the voice actors were great, and they gave each character so much life and meaning in those games. And that sort of, I was like, I want to work on this game. I want to do stuff like this. And
of course,
now working on like Genshin Impact, I get to listen to a bunch of those actors' dialogue because they're a bunch of the Trails voice actors are on Genshin, and I get to like listen and check their voiceover like every day. And it's kind of crazy how that happened in such a short time, but that was definitely an inspiration for me that, I was never someone who was big into like anime dubbing, or I didn't really appreciate it, but now I've gained like such an appreciation for what voice actors do, what people who localize these projects from Japan to America do. And the voice acting might not match like the original Japanese dub by any means, but I think that it's important that these stories can be brought from overseas and become more normalized. I mean, in the last,
the people to relate to. I mean,
mm-hmm. I remember when I graduated middle school in 2010, so that's 13 years ago, almost 13 years ago now, which doesn't seem like a long time for it doesn't feel like a long time for me either. But what's been crazy for me in the last 13, 14 years is that things like anime and those video games were not popular.
I know, man.
Right? I mean, like, I think there was a fan base for it in the US, but think about just how popular like My Hero Academia is, or Naruto, or even like Chainsaw Man is like incredibly popular now.
And what about the sound design in Chainsaw Man? Have you listened to it?
I love the Chainsaw Man dub is fantastic. Every voice actor in that dub was cast incredibly well and given great direction. So I follow Ryan Colt Levy, who's the voice actor for English voice for Denji. And he is a perfect example of someone that brings so much passion to the role and makes it work so well. So if you don't know, like Ryan, before he voiced Denji, wrote, I think, the casting director of Chainsaw Man, and he was a well-known voice actor. He had some roles already, but I believe what happened was he wrote the casting director saying like, "This is a role that's like made for me. That I can like take this role to such like an extreme height.
What a gold man!
Yeah, like please let me like audition for it and read for it." And he got the role, and he, it's something that he really prides himself on because he believed in himself, and if you listen to his performance, he's fantastic as Denji. And and Chainsaw Man has great sound design in general. And great. I've listened to the soundtrack, and it's great music.
And the Follies, man, they are so clean and nasty at the same time.
Yeah. It's a series that I think a lot of anime, like in general, doesn't have the best sound design. Where I think it's based more on budget, where they don't have a huge dedicated sound team, or they have to reuse a lot of assets. For example, like One Piece is a show that I think, it's not that One Piece the story is bad or anything, but because the show has been going on for so long, and this is maybe not as much in recent episodes, but maybe a while ago, like I can tell when they reuse sound effects, or they've been reusing score for a long time.
I haven't watched it, but my nephew has told me that they use kind of the same sound banks from Dragon Ball Z, for example.
Yeah, the sound design hasn't really changed for. I mean, granted, I haven't watched the last like X hundred episodes of One Piece, so I could be totally wrong. But I noticed when I was watching it that a lot of the assets felt reused, a lot of the effects felt reused and recycled, and I can imagine that's attributed to they have to make so many episodes. It's such a long running show that they might not have the budget for that sort of thing. Whereas Chainsaw Man is like, here are 12 episodes by Mappa. The budget is probably great, and there's more like dedication and love going into every single episode. Where One Piece is more, here's this ongoing thing. We just have to kind of keep it going.
Oh my god! Through 20 years.
Yeah, but like I think those shorter series that have those really dedicated teams, like Chainsaw Man, have great sound design.
Okay, man. Let's talk about your job, your work in Genshin Impact in Callisto Protocol, which I didn't know much about it, but I researched a bit, and it turns out that it's known for its great sound design, actually.
Yeah, I'm really happy with how Callisto Protocol sounds, and so background on like where I work. So I work for Formosa Group. We're a large post-production company in Los Angeles, based in Los Angeles, but we have studios in different cities and different countries around the world. I work for their interactive team, which handles all games. So games that we've done a lot of sound work on include Horizon Forbidden West, The Last of Us series. We do some work for League of Legends, Genshin Impact. So the work that I do is I'm sort of like a production assistant on certain games, but for the Callisto Protocol, I did more technical sound design work. So I was an associate designer on that game. So like real quick for like games like Genshin Impact, we record all of Genshin's voiceover in our studio. So a lot of my work is basically kind of checking over that voiceover and making sure that it sounds okay. I kind of coordinate that voiceover between different dialogue designers and our company. I basically just check over it, make sure it's all sounding good and that the correct takes are used and everything's organized well. And then for games like, for League of Legends, we do like some cosmetic works on their champions, and I've done some like more technical work on that game as well.
Okay. So you,
God of War,
were you also connecting the actual sound effects? Like you said before, like the more of a little bit of a programming approach.
It's for League of Legends. Yes, there was a little more technical work that I was doing where I was kind of connecting some of like the new sound effects we've made into the game.
Okay.
Genshin is more of, we're a vendor that records and edits all of their dialogue and kind of sends it back to them. So Genshin is basically, they're handling more of that process where we send all of the voiceover back to MiHoYo.
Okay, man.
But for Callisto, I can definitely talk about more, where that was a game where our team was brought on to do all of the Foley sound design. So basically what we handled was the Foley for the player character Jacob.
But wait, excuse me, I interrupt you for a bit. I know what Foley is, but can you explain our viewers what a Foley is? Because maybe not everyone knows.
So Foley is the process of basically creating sound effects in a studio environment. So you'll use props, and in film, basically when you're watching like a scene back, you would use props to sort of mimic different sound effects. And this includes anything from cloth rustling, footsteps, different like hand and body touches and movements. And then there's a lot that you can do with gore, for example.
Sure.
Your viewers might be familiar with any videos they've seen of people in the Foley studio like crushing vegetables, or that's like a big thing where like breaking like a cucumber or something to recreate like bones breaking or blood splurting. But it fully encompasses a lot. So for the Callisto Protocol, our team was basically responsible for the Foley for the main player character, Jacob. So that's including his footsteps, what his body is, his kind of body movements, his cloth movements. And Jacob has two different suits in the game, kind of a prison suit. And then we have like this exoskeleton kind of, what's it called? Like a upgrade type suit. That's a little clunkier, but it's more like what he wears when he's outside in the cold. And then basically all of the enemy characters in the game. So all of the different mutated monsters. So like I can also talk about Callisto Protocol for the viewers, that it's a game that Yeah, it's a horror game developed by the creator of Dead Space. It's a very cinematic style game, but it's a survival horror game where you play as this main character Jacob, who's falsely imprisoned on one of Jupiter's moons. And while he's in prison, there's sort of this outbreak of a virus inside the prison that mutates the inmates into these crazy, gory alien monsters. And it's your goal to kind of like discover the mystery of it and also survive and get out of there alive. And you have like different types of gun weapons and combat weapons throughout the game that you get.
You play it?
Yeah, I've actually played through the whole game too, and which is it was weird to play through it because I had worked on the game for I think like 9 months or something.
Okay,
worked some crazy hours on that game, and it was a wild experience. But playing the game, it was weird for me because I knew like I knew the whole story. I had watched a lot of the cinematics. I knew all the enemies and how they sounded and what they looked like. And
you spoiled yourself.
I did. Yeah. I actually didn't know. I didn't watch all of the cutscenes for the very end. I kind of knew what happened in the end, but I didn't know everything. But it was funny. Like when I played through the final boss, for example, I got stuck for a while and I was like rage quitting. Like I worked on this character. I mean, I didn't work on the gameplay. But like I know this guy. Like why am I losing to him?
Did you get to smash some eggs on the stuff in the Foley making?
No, so I wasn't on the Foley stage at all for this. So basically, how I think it kind of worked was the process, as I understood it, was we were recording the Foley effects. Those go off to our design team and they edit them. And basically, once they're ready to be put in the game, my job was to organize those files and in the game audio middleware wise, connect them to the game and make sure they're all organized in the hierarchy correctly. So like something that's interesting, for example, is in games, this is a lot different from when I was working in film. Okay. The randomization of things in games is very, very interesting to me. And if you play a game like The Last of Us, for example, if you're walking on at a given moment in the game, there are so many different. First of all, there's so many different surfaces. There's in the Callisto Protocol, there's different metals and gory types of surfaces and concrete and stuff. I'm sure in The Last of Us, there's different types of grass and snow and concrete and dirt, and these are all things you have to account for when you're designing because you're not creating like one set of footsteps that change slightly. You're making a bunch of different footsteps for these different types of surfaces. So I think in Callisto we had 14 different surfaces, and with that come a variety of different types of footsteps and leg movements and stuff. And then in that is a variety of different sounding effects. So when you're in games, they'll cycle through different sound effects based on how you're playing. Like the game, of course, the inputs you're putting on your controller, the game is responding to that. So when you're playing The Last of Us and you're walking around, you're not hearing the same footstep from the left and right foot over and over and over again. You're probably cycling through at least like 10 to 20 different footstep effects that are also being randomized based on their pitch too. And so it makes it so that you're not hearing the same thing over and over again. And that's something that I thought was super interesting on the Callisto Protocol was basically how many sound assets that were being created for the game. This is just for Foley, for like footsteps and body movements and things. Not even like some of the more gory stuff or like the vocals or the more environmental effects. Like we didn't do any of the like environmental type things here. But we did handle a bunch of, I think, some of the props, and I think what was just very cool to see and eye-opening for me, as this is my first big game project, that just how many different sound effects are being put into a game that the game is sort of cycling through and randomizing for the player experience.
Man, sound design is such an underappreciated art. And a huge world, it seems. Yeah,
and I think that what's interesting about sound is that it's very easy, I think, to forgive like bad cinematography if the sound design is good. But if like the sound is missing or like a line of dialogue is missing, it's so noticeable and really takes you out of the experience, right? Like I definitely have played through games where maybe early on, like there's a bug or something and something's missing, and you can just tell that, something needs to be fixed.
Do you have a top 3 worst sound design ever?
Top 3 worst sound design ever?
Do you have one?
Like in things I've seen?
Yeah, like you are like playing or watching something and you think like, oh man, this is awful.
I don't know if I have like a top 3 worst ones, but I can definitely think of, I'm trying to remember. There are definitely different times where I've watched a movie and you can hear the ADR line, for example. And, you don't really know who's sort of responsible for that. It could be, like it could be that it was hard to get the production audio on set, or the actor fumbled the line, and then when they were brought into the studio later, they gave a different delivery. There's a whole bunch of different variables that could affect, something sounding not the best, right?
There is a ton, for sure.
I can say, instead of maybe a bad sound design, I can definitely point to a scene where you can hear if you listen closely, an ADR line. So if you've seen No Country for Old Men, it's like one of my favorite films. It's a very well sound designed film. There's a scene where the antagonist, Anton Sugar, is at a gas station, and there's a very tense interaction with him and the gas station clerk. And there's, I didn't notice this until one of my professors in college pointed it out, but he has a line, I think, in his speech towards the end of the scene where he says, "It's neither heads nor tails, or it's neither here or there." I forget what the exact line is, but you can hear, if you have like the volume up, and you can hear the line is ADR'd, and it was recorded in a studio separately from on set. You can hear the difference in the clip being sort of added to the scene. It's very subtle, and it's mixed well. But if you listen very, very closely, you can figure it out.
Man.
I'm trying to think. I feel like there's definitely a film I've seen recently that had like a bad mix or bad sound design. The things I would probably notice the most in watching like film or TV is ADR. That's probably like the closest thing you can usually notice, just because it's hard to sort of recreate those lines, I think, in a studio environment, and it's hard to match it up sometimes, especially if the actor gives a different performance later on. But that's the most noticeable thing I could probably figure out. I have one criticism, actually. This is okay. So I love Magic the Gathering. Like I love
the game, right?
Yeah. So I play a lot on Magic Arena. That's like the digital version of the game.
Okay.
And the game has like some decent sound design, but it is lacking a lot. I think one thing that sets Magic Arena, like Magic has a lot better gameplay than games that I played, like card games. Like I enjoy Magic more than Hearthstone. I think they're both fantastic games, but I think Hearthstone has way better vocal design and sound design in that game. And I remember one criticism I had for Magic Arena sound design. The good thing about Magic Arena sound design is when you play the Planeswalker characters, like the main characters in the story, if you play their cards, they have different vocal lines, like dialogue lines, and that's cool. I like that. And if you play like certain types of enemies or cards, like a bird, for example, you'll hear a bird effect, but there's not a lot of different bird effects it'll cycle through. So if you play like a hawk card or like an eagle card, they'll have like a very similar effect probably. And one thing that bothered me was, this is like such a minor criticism of this game, but I remember there's this one expansion called Strixhaven, where the story is about this like world of mages that attend this like magic school, and they're all very ingenious, and it's sort of like Harry Potter in a way.
Okay.
But like magic's kind of take on like the wizarding school, and like there's like 5 student characters that have like their own card in the set, and one character, Rutha, is like this orc kind of human girl that has that has a really cool like card ability, and she can like double spells and like do all this cool magic sort of stuff. And I thought, and my issue was when you would play the card in the game, if you have the sound design on in Arena, if you have the sound effects on, she just makes a generic orc sound, like a monster sound. Like she's just like a mindless type of orc monster. And I'm like, no, this character should have like a dialogue line or like say something really cool or have a magic-y kind of effect, but it just is like a very generic like monster.
Okay, very little attention to detail then.
Yeah, and it's something where like I'm sure their sound design team is not as big as Hearthstone or Legends of Runeterra. And you know, Magic's selling point is its gameplay more than anything else. And I love Magic, and I Magic is a huge part of my life. And I have so much respect for that game. But you know, that was a very minor thing where I said like this should have a different sound effect. This should have like a really cool dialogue line to this girl or character saying like, I don't know, do something with magic, whatever. That doesn't matter like what it is, but just having a generic like orc like grunt, yeah, I think kind of diminishes like the writing and the design they put behind that character card to begin with.
You're totally right, my friend.
Yeah.
Almost last question. What has been your best and worst work experience overall in terms of professional achievements, in terms of teamwork, everything overall? Yeah.
I think I haven't really had like a worst kind of professional experience. I think for the Callisto Protocol, one thing I can talk about is like that was an experience that was very, very difficult for me. It was the hardest thing I've ever worked on.
The most challenging one then.
The most challenging for sure, but it was the most gratifying at the same time, where that project was, so I can talk a little bit more about what I worked on. So that I was working partly in Wise, which I mentioned, where I'm sort of organizing the hierarchies of the effects and basically making sure the sounds are connecting to the right thing that'll connect correctly in the game. And then the other part of that was we would watch back the animations from the cutscenes and basically the different walk cycle animations and combat cycle animations for all the enemies. And my job was to basically create these markers. You know, maybe I would watch like a 1-minute clip of one of the enemies doing like an aggressive walk forward and backward or something, or forward and sideways. And I would have to basically make a marker at every point the foot touches, a footstep touches the ground. And with when like a leg movement or an arm moves or something, you know, it's a lot of very, so basically when you would play back the game, it would play back in a way where if it's like walking, you would hear those footsteps and you would hear those movements. So it was a lot of, you know, excuse me, the work was really aggressive, I guess. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, but it was a lot of different assets and a lot of different animations to go through.
Very specific.
And I was doing this on a daily basis from basically May through October, or kind of March. Or I had started on the project back in February as well. It was what was challenging for me was that it was my first big game I've ever worked on. I mean, I had started the company in February, and I was working full time on Callisto by May or June. And it was my first also professional project in working in Wise. I worked in Unreal Engine 4 for the animations and stuff. And it was first of all, the project itself was very intense.
Wait, you also did animations?
Well, I didn't animate, but basically like helping the animations, like connecting the sounds to the animation.
The technical stuff.
Unreal. Yeah, the technical stuff.
Yeah.
And I think what was challenging for me was that it was my first like professional non-film project. It was my first project in Wise, where I was, you know, working in a software that I never worked in professionally. Unreal Engine I had not worked in before ever, and not professionally either. And it was definitely a challenge. And the work that I did, you know, at times wasn't the most like intense. Like it was, you know, it was there were times where the work was pretty easy to figure out, where but there were definitely a lot of problems we ran into that we had to solve, and I had to talk to like our lead technical designer and figure out how like the hierarchies and whys would work, and how different sounds if the sounds were connecting and playing back correctly. I did like QA testing for the game, where I was kind of going through the game and trying to find bugs and
you
play
also
test
did
as
that.
well. Yeah, I did a little bit of play testing towards the end.
You lived the dream, man.
Yeah,
Basically.
I got to play games at work. Yeah, I love the dream. But like, I think overall, like the game, it's definitely like my favorite project I've worked on to this date, because I think the sound design is so good. The team at Striking Distance is fantastic, and the lead designer Nassim is incredibly smart and talented guy, and it was very cool to work with that team. I mean, the schedule was definitely very, very tight. We had to work like some overtime, and which is pretty normal when you're working on games of that size and scope. But overall, I think for me, it was personally a very hard experience, because I was just doing things I had not done professionally before, and I was kind of thrown into the deep end a little bit of, here's some training, here are the tools you need, now kind of go do it. And I definitely messed up a number of times, and I felt bad about it. But I think what I came to balance with was that, this was a hard project. This was something I hadn't done before. But I was able to learn a lot from different team members and collaborate with them and find solutions. And that's what I think was really gratifying. And that's why I feel, so positive about that experience in the end, because it was, I think that I haven't, I'm not working on my next big project for at least a few months, but things have been like so chill and easy since that game. But there were times that I think there were times that were really awesome on that project, where I found cool ways to solve problems with my team. So, for example, when I was playtesting, I had like a little bit of downtime, and I was trying to figure out some audio bugs in the game. And because I think I had some gaming background, I was able to figure out like, oh, this is how you swap through the weapons in the game. And I had like the dev version of the game, like not the release version, so I could add like unlimited ammo to my to my inventory and stuff, and like play around with different things in the game to test them out. And there was one time where one of our designers wanted me to capture some gameplay of him, because he was designing the Foley for when you in the game you can swap through weapons and like holster them and back and stuff, and he was designing all those effects. And I think, we were under like some pretty serious time crunch at that point. It was like very late in the project, and I remember that because I had played the game and I had done some testing and trying to solve some bugs, I had known the in and outs of like how to do that very quickly. So I remember I got like a video capture for him, and we like played the game together, and I shared my screen, and he was able to get like all of the captures he needed to design to, and have like really good video reference for how fast the character is swapping through, and like how to time everything correctly. So that was a time where there was a really great communication teamwork with me and this one coworker. And I think if I hadn't done the QA testing or played around in the game when I had downtime, I wouldn't have been able to like help him out with that. So that was cool that I was able to do something to help out make the design process go smoother and faster. And I think in games, there's a lot of great collaboration and communication that happens, and you find there's a lot of problems you have to solve in these like really complex engines, and
I cannot even imagine, man.
Yeah, it's a lot, but I think you can find those solutions and make those workflows faster. It's so cool to make that stuff work together.
Oh crap, man! You live the dream. You are a hero in the shadows, man. Basically.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and push forward and do my best to learn more and keep it going.
Okay, then the last part of this video. If you got this far on the video, thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comment what was your favorite theme or part about this interview, if you like more content like this actually. And last part, in this channel, I don't know if you actually know, or you maybe know, I have a section or a video series called Reaction and Analysis, where I react and give a little bit of a musical insight to anime openings and soundtracks. And I would like you to do the same thing, but with little slices of some video game footage.
Sure.
Of course, just let me check that everything is going smooth here. Man, I didn't record anything.
No.
I'm just kidding, man.
Oh my
I
God.
got you, right?
I was like, I would do it again. Like,
Oh my God.
This was good practice. Like I'll be better the next time.
Yeah, I think everything is going smooth. I was thinking about that minutes ago, like, oh man, imagine if something is off here. So let's start by but I have to share the screen, right? This one inside, have you played it?
I have not.
Me neither, but I researched a little bit. It turns out that it's kind of good. People kind of praise it for the sound design.
So one thing that I noticed first is that a lot of the design has gone into the environments and the Foley. The world feels very reverberant, where there's a lot of echoiness sort of to it. And I think with the reason why it's that way is to make you feel sort of small and this like in this very big space. Like your character seems like very tiny compared to the backgrounds, and I think visually you look very small, but the sound sort of replicates that with how reverberant and how like echoey it is. Besides like the dogs barking, you're only really hearing at least what I was hearing, like the footsteps come through very clear. The Foley is definitely a huge part of this as well, like very crisp Foley, but the world itself feels very empty and dark and like kind of like an echoey chamber. I don't know how else to.
You feel very alone, man.
Yeah. I think it is to make you feel isolated and helpless and alone. I think like the dog barking, I wish they could change up a little bit more, because it was sort of like it sounded to me like it was very similar between the different barks. But other than that, like I like that there's a sort of isolation of there's no really score or dialogue. One thing that I did notice that I thought was a nice subtle approach was you could hear the character breathing, but it wasn't too loud or like haggard. It was very like kind of soft and subtle, but it was present, which I liked.
Wow, man. Incredible insight. Okay, then next one. This one, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Do you know about it?
I've heard about this game, but I haven't played it before.
It's a AA game. I have actually played it, and man, it's crazy. It's just crazy, yeah. See for yourself.
love the performance of whoever plays that character, because she's very. One thing I noticed, this is towards the end when she's fighting the monster guy. Like, she's very visceral in how she like screams when she fights. Like, when I played a lot of the Dark Souls games, and you know what I heard in her performance was very much like there's something about her character that is, you know, she's like what's the right word? Like her fighting style is very aggressive and chaotic. Like I love like the way her voice sounds when she screams when she swipes her sword.
Like the intention, right? Yeah,
like it wasn't like a normal kind of like kind of grunt. Like it sounded like very desperate in a way. That's the word I was looking for. Kind of, there's like desperation behind her voice. So I like that
That's performance.
The word, yeah, and then a lot of cool design there with like the vocal sort of, what's the right word, like tornado around you. And like it was cool because like some phrases were coming through, like you'd hear like the word darkness and stuff, but then there's like kind of this cacophony of other voices you're hearing. But I like that when that close up when your face turns blue, like it sounded very like ASMR type, like the way she whispered and all like the different her it feels like her words, like every word she said like kind of hit really well. It wasn't like it was soft, but like the words kind of had meaning to it.
And you can actually listen to her to your ear, man.
Right.
As you said, so ASMR.
It's a cool, like, it was also a cool perspective to see it, like, because she's like looking like directly at you too, and in this like kind of echoey chamber of vocals and stuff. Cool design there with that kind of like oscillating, like what's the word for it? Like drone kind of in the background. That kind of brings you in and brings you out of that.
Okay.
That close up. It sounds cool though. Like that's a game that I might want to pick up. I love like dark fantasy type games like that.
Man, that shit is crazy, dude. I'm telling you. It's about some mental illness. She has some mental illness. I don't remember which one. I didn't complete the game.
I wonder
and
if
that's the craziness about the game, you know?
Right.
Because you experience how is it to be that crazy, literally crazy.
Are you experiencing the game like through her perspective for the most? Like, are you following her for the most part? Okay.
Yeah.
Like it sounds kind of like schizophrenic in a way. Like
I think that was it. Like
maybe
like
you're cursed or something with those voices, because the voices are like swirling or are staying with you even through that fight. Like they were in that cutscene, but then when you got into the gameplay, those elements were still present as well.
For sure, and it's crazy because you experience the game as her, but from the schizophrenia or whatever perspective, but how it relates to the mythology of her civilization. So she thinks that there are some curses, some gods, some demons, some stuff there, and sometimes there isn't something there. It's really crazy, yeah. And last one that you already spoiled a little bit about The Last of Us 2. It's a really praised game in every aspect. What do you think?
This is gonna be kind of weird because I'm like commenting on audio that my coworkers have done. Like,
Really?
yeah, so like I Formosa did a lot of the sound design and audio aspects for the Last of Us games, but it was before I joined the company. So I can't give any criticism because my boss will be mad at me. I'm kidding. No, I think what's cool about the Last of Us games, and from what I've seen through gameplay, is that how sort of practical everything is in those games. Like everything just sounds like it should. It has a great like cinematic quality too, where like the Foley is very crisp and present. Like I noticed when she was kind of like shimmying on the ground when she was like kind of in stealth mode. Just you can I love just all like the different surfaces. It all sounds like it should, if that makes sense. So there's nothing crazy going on in terms of like creative design, I guess, but the sound design greatly matches the tone of the game. And one thing that I noticed too was sort of like the user experience elements in that, where like the different kind of menu sounds, but they weren't like really overpowering. Like they played nicely in the background while there was a lot of crazy stuff happening in the scene or in that part of the game. But I actually remember like I was doing this online game audio course for Berklee College of Music in 2021, and one of my assignments was to redesign a whole scene from
The
Last of Us, or it was a gameplay part of Last of Us part 1, or remastered. And I remember like I had to be like very specific with like the sound effects that I used, and I tried to create a lot of unique backgrounds, especially when you're kind of going in and out of buildings. Like you don't want those environments to sound exactly the same. You want them to sound different as you sort of pass through them. Right.
Okay.
Like if you're outside of a building, you hear like the different environmental sounds around you. But when you go inside, those sounds should be not as present, or they're sort of muffled in a way because you're inside walls now. But there's a lot of openness between those. You're kind of going in and out of like stores with broken windows and stuff. So I think what's interesting about those environments is that you're experiencing it as if you were walking through them as well. And there's like cool creature design there with like the plant type monsters and great like weapon effects there too as well. But I think overall, just those games just sound so crisp and clean and practical, and they're made to just match the tone, I think, of the gameplay and the story.
It's very good, and let's hope that your boss actually watches this video. I highly doubt it, but if he or she does, maybe he or she will give you a raise. Yeah. Let's hope so.
I'm definitely the next. I haven't played through the Last of Us games, but I waited until remastered for the first part came out, which I'm going. That's like next on my list, and I actually have a credit in that game because I did
part one.
In part one, yeah, because that's when I first started at Formosa, and I did like some very, very minor work on that game. But that's my first official game credit is Last of Us Part 1.
Holy crap, man! What can you say after that?
Yeah,
nothing. And do you appear in the credits?
Yes. Yeah.
Can I look for you?
Yeah. I can find it. I can give you the timestamp, but I believe I'm in the credits for Last of Us Part 1.
Maybe it would be some unnecessary work for you. Don't do it.
No, you can look for it. But yeah, like those games are fantastic, and they have so many awards for their different audio awards too, and I'm super excited also to watch The Last of Us show on HBO because
I was going to talk about that.
Yeah, because our company, not the game side, but the film and TV side, also worked on the audio for that. So it's cool that our whole company as a whole has been involved in the audio for both the game and the show.
For sure. It captures so much better the overall feeling of the game and translated into the show, I think.
Yeah, I'm interested to kind of see how the sound design is like, or how the mixing is like in the show, and if that's similar to how it's weird to kind of have like a game that's a story-based game with cinematics be adapted to TV. Like, I have like I have thoughts on like how like why I don't really understand why games have to be adapted to TV, but I do understand that like those stories are so great that you want them to reach as wide of an audience as possible, and not everyone wants to play games. And I think even Neil Druckmann said something along the lines of like, my parents get to experience The Last of Us now because they're never going to play the games and they can't, but they can watch the show and experience.
I'm going to make mine watch it, you know.
Yeah. But yeah, those games are and I'm sure the show will be fantastic and sound great, hopefully.
Well, Roman, thank you so much for this. I have a hell of a time, a blast of a time. I hope you also did. Was amazing. That was a very deep insight. Thank you for enduring my broken accent from hell. Thank you so much for that. And see you around, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks you.
All right.